My name is Madison Cole, and this is a story about what happens when consequences finally catch up. The kind of consequences that take decades to arrive, but hit harder than anyone ever expects. I'm sitting here in my living room, early morning light coming through these windows that I worked 3 jobs to pay for, and I'm about to tell you something that my own mother said would destroy me. Instead, it's what finally set me free. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to all of Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. My story starts in a courtroom in Superior Court, in the very jurisdiction where I grew up. I can still hear the ambient sounds that morning. Papers shuffling, the echo of a gavel in the distance, the cold efficiency of the American legal system moving forward like a machine that doesn't care about hearts. My parents were suing me. Not for money. Not for property. They were suing me for access to my son. The same child they once told me should never have been born. The same grandchild they said would be an embarrassment to the family name. But that morning in court, they had lawyers and a petition and grandparent rights statutes printed in bold letters. They had leverage they thought was bulletproof. Or, at least, they believed they did. By the end of this story, a single document would decide who truly held power in this family. And it wouldn't be the people with the money. It wouldn't be the people with the social standing. It would be the person who had nothing to lose because she had already lost everything once before. Let me take you back to where everything began. I grew up in a town called Riverside, Connecticut. Not the part you see in glossy magazines. The part where the houses are perfectly maintained, the lawns are aggressively manicured, and every family looks like they stepped out of a Ralph Lauren catalog. My father, Robert Cole, was a senior executive at an insurance firm. My mother, Patricia Ashford Cole, sat on the boards of 3 different charities and was known for her ability to organize fundraisers with military precision. They weren't unkind people. That's what made it so much harder, actually. They weren't the kind of parents who yelled or threw things. They were worse than that. They were the kind of parents who wielded silence like a weapon. They wielded conditional love like a budget, doling it out in careful measurements based on whether you met their expectations. My childhood looked perfect from the outside. That was always the point. We had the right house in the right neighborhood. My mother had the right friends. I went to the right schools. Everything was about optics, about appearance, about what people thought when they heard our name. By the time I was in sophomore year of high school, I was already exhausted from performing a version of myself that didn't actually exist. I was taking advanced placement courses. I was on the student council. I was volunteering at the library on Saturday mornings. I was the kind of daughter that other mothers pointed to as an example of good parenting. But inside, I was drowning. Inside, I was a teenager who felt like she was living someone else's life. Love in our house came with conditions. It came with report cards with straight A's. It came with acceptance to the right colleges. It came with the unspoken understanding that you would never, ever do anything to embarrass the family. You would never be the subject of town gossip. You would never give anyone a reason to whisper. I already knew all this by sophomore year. And I already understood in that teenage way that feels so heavy at the time that I might never be able to meet these conditions. Not fully. Not without erasing myself completely. Then I met Daniel. He was a junior, worked at the coffee shop downtown, and he had a way of making you feel like you mattered just for being yourself. He didn't care about grades or student council or how many scholarships I might get. He thought I was interesting just because I was Madison. Just because I existed. In a life where I was constantly performing, Daniel made me feel seen. And I fell for him completely, in that desperate, all-consuming way that teenagers do when they finally feel accepted. I wasn't careful. My parents had raised me to be intelligent about everything except the one thing that mattered most. I had no idea how to be careful about my own heart. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday in November. I remember the bathroom tile was cold under my feet. I remember my hands shaking so badly that I could barely hold the test. I remember thinking, very clearly and with absolute certainty, that this was the moment everything would change. I didn't imagine how change would look. I couldn't have predicted the specific way that my mother's face would go blank when I told her. I couldn't have imagined the tone of voice my father would use when he said we needed to have a family meeting. They didn't yell. That's what I keep coming back to. If they had yelled, if they had screamed, if they had thrown things or cried or shown any emotion at all, maybe it would have hurt less. But instead, they were efficient. They were practical. My mother took out a notepad. My father asked about timeline and options. They discussed abortion like it was a fiscal policy decision. They discussed adoption like it was a tax write-off. And when I said I wanted to keep the baby, when I said I wanted to have my son, they looked at me like I had told them I was dropping out of school to join the circus. The argument wasn't about the baby. That's what I need you to understand. The argument was about embarrassment. It was about what this would do to their image. It was about how they would explain my absence to their friends. My mother said, word for word, "We can tell people you're away at school. We can manage this." But I refused to manage it. I refused to disappear. And that's when they made it clear that if I insisted on keeping this baby, on having this baby, on ruining our family's reputation, then I could not do it under their roof. I was 15 years old. I was scared beyond measure. I was pregnant and alone and staring at people I had called my parents my entire life, and they were telling me that love had a price, and I could not afford it. By the next morning, they had already begun the process of making me vanish. They packed a bag for me. Not a lot, just essentials. They had already withdrawn me from Riverside High School and enrolled me in something called New Horizons Alternative Academy, which was a place where they sent pregnant girls and trouble students. They didn't frame it as punishment. They framed it as practical. They explained it in calm, measured tones. I would attend this new school. I would stay with my father's sister, Aunt Margaret, who lived 2 towns over. They would pay for the baby's birth. They would make sure I had what I needed, financially. But I would not be coming home. Not while I was pregnant. Not unless I changed my mind about terminating. The legal mechanics of teenage emancipation are murky, but what happened to me that day was a form of it. They didn't need a court order. All they needed was a car ride and a packed suitcase and the absolute certainty that I had no other options. They told extended family I had moved away for school. They told their friends I was in an advanced academic program. They erased me from Riverside the way you might close a browser tab. Clean. Simple. Final. And I stayed gone. By that point, my son was born. His name is Christopher, and he came into the world on a Tuesday morning in March, and he was perfect and terrifying and utterly mine. I was 16 years old, and I held him in my arms, and something in my chest cracked open that never fully healed. I named him Christopher James Cole. I gave him my last name because it was the only inheritance I had left to give. Aunt Margaret was kind in a way my mother could never be. She was a widow, never had children of her own, and she took one look at baby Christopher and fell in love completely and without condition. She didn't make me feel like a burden. She helped me finish my GED. She watched Christopher while I worked night shifts at a 24-hour diner. She held me when I cried about my mother, about the unfairness of it all, about the way love could be withdrawn so completely. But even with Aunt Margaret's kindness, those early years were brutally hard. I was a teenager trying to be a mother. I was working double shifts and falling asleep during GED study sessions. I was trying to figure out how to be both a parent and a human being when I was still barely out of childhood myself. Christopher slept in a crib I bought at a secondhand shop. I walked him in a stroller someone had given me when they upgraded. Every single thing we had, I had earned through work and exhaustion. And I did it without asking for anything from my parents. Not because I was noble, but because something in me had died that day they sent me away. The part of me that believed they would ever choose me over their reputation had simply stopped existing. Then, when Christopher was 3 years old, someone came into our lives who changed everything. Her name was Eleanor Hartwell, and she lived 2 doors down from Aunt Margaret. Eleanor was in her late 60s, had lost her own daughter in a car accident 15 years earlier, and was quietly volunteering at the community center when she met me. I was there with Christopher, who was in the preschool program, and Eleanor was leading an art class. She actually noticed me, the way Aunt Margaret had, and she started checking in. She started inviting us over for dinner. She started loving Christopher like he was her own grandchild, which, in every way that mattered, he became. Eleanor believed that family wasn't about blood. Family was about the people who showed up. Family was about protection. Family was about choosing someone again and again, even on the hardest days. With Eleanor's encouragement, I applied to community college. I studied business management. I worked my way through school while raising Christopher and putting money away every single week. By the time Christopher was in middle school, I had enough saved to put a down payment on a small house. It was a terrible house, actually needs work, limited square footage, the kind of place that real estate agents call cozy, but it was ours. When Christopher was 12, Eleanor had a stroke. She recovered mostly, but it changed her. It made her think about legacy. It made her think about who would carry forward the values she cared about. And it made her call her lawyer. She sat me down one afternoon and said, "Maddie, I need to do something legal. I need to make sure that if anything happens to me, you and Christopher are protected." She created a comprehensive guardianship arrangement. She updated her will to make me Christopher's guardian in case anything happened to her, not because she was worried about Aunt Margaret, but because Eleanor wanted it to be official. She wanted it to be ironclad. She wanted the world to know that she had chosen me, and I had chosen her, and that bond was as real as any biological one. She established a college fund for Christopher. She set up protections in her trust that explicitly named me as the decision-maker for her healthcare, for her finances, for everything. And in a move that I didn't fully understand at the time, but would later become profoundly important, she explicitly stated in her legal documents that Christopher's biological grandparents had no rights to him and no access to him, should anything ever happen to Eleanor or to me. I asked her why she felt the need to be so specific about that. She looked at me very seriously and said, "Because love is something people take when they think they can win." And I understood, then, that Eleanor knew more about my story than I had ever told her. Somehow, she had simply understood. For 21 years, we lived in a kind of peace. It wasn't perfect. Life never is. But it was real. It was honest. I watched Christopher grow up, watched him become a thoughtful, kind, ambitious young man who understood responsibility because I had modeled it for him every single day. He worked through high school. He volunteered. He got into a good college. He eventually went to medical school because he had always wanted to help people. And when he did, when Christopher became Dr. Christopher Cole and started working as an emergency medicine physician, something shifted in the universe. The local news did a small feature on him. They called him a hometown hero, and they mentioned his work in emergency medicine, and they used his full name, and they did a photo essay that showed him in his white coat at the hospital. The article was small. It ran in the local Connecticut section of a regional newspaper. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. But my parents noticed it. They had been living in the same town the entire time, living the same lives, going to the same country club, attending the same charitable galas, maintaining the same carefully constructed image. And suddenly, they saw proof that the granddaughter and grandson they had erased had become something remarkable. Christopher was a doctor. A successful doctor. A doctor with their last name. A doctor who was making real money, earning real respect, and bringing real honor to the family legacy that they cared about more than they had ever cared about me. And that was when they started reaching out. It was subtle at first. My mother sent a letter to the address she found online. She didn't apologize. She wrote, "I've seen the wonderful news about Christopher. We're so proud that he's carrying on the Cole name with such distinction. We'd love to reconnect and tell him how much his family loves him." I read that letter 6 times. I read it until the words blurred together. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge what she had done. She didn't recognize that she had disowned me, had cast me out, had made it clear that I was disposable. She just saw an opportunity. She saw a successful young man with her last name, and she saw a chance to claim credit for him. She saw a chance to be part of a winning story. When I didn't respond, my father called the hospital. He asked to speak with Christopher. The receptionist told him that Dr. Cole was with patients and couldn't take personal calls, but my father left a message saying he was a family member and had an urgent family matter to discuss. Christopher got the message. He called me, confused, asking if something had happened. And I had to tell him the truth. I had to tell him the story that I had been protecting him from his entire life. I had to explain that the people who had created me had decided I wasn't worth keeping, and that now they wanted to know him. I had to watch my son's face change as he understood that his own blood relatives had tried to erase his mother, and now wanted to profit from his success. The calls continued. My parents tried to reach Christopher directly multiple times. They sent registered letters. They showed up at the hospital with flowers and apologies that weren't apologies, explanations that weren't explanations, attempts to build bridges that had burned so completely there was nothing left to connect. Christopher handled it with the grace I had tried to teach him, but he made it clear he was not interested in reconciliation with people who had hurt me. He was not interested in family that came with conditions and opportunism. But my parents weren't used to being told no. They had lived 60 years in a bubble of privilege where no was rare, and they had the resources to hire someone who could help them get what they wanted. That's when the lawsuit arrived. The legal documents came in a thick envelope, stamped with official seals and attorney letterhead. Grandparent rights petition. Best interest of the child. Biological connection. All the language that grandparents' rights statutes allow you to use when you decide that you want access to someone else's child. The irony was staggering. The people who had legally cast me out when I was a minor were now trying to use the law to force their way into my adult son's life. The people who had said I was ruining the family were now dragging the family name through court. The people who had valued reputation above all else were now destroying it in pursuit of a relationship they had no real interest in. They wanted Christopher. Or more precisely, they wanted what Christopher represented. They wanted a doctor grandson. They wanted the story of reconciliation and family love that would play well at their country club. They wanted the narrative of finally understanding what really mattered, of finally seeing that family is everything. But they didn't want me. They had never wanted me. And that was the part that finally broke something open. Christopher was 24 years old when this lawsuit was filed. He was a fully grown adult with the legal right to choose his own relationships. But the law is murky about these things. The law sometimes assumes that biological connections are inherently valuable. The law sometimes assumes that children benefit from knowing their grandparents, even when those grandparents have shown no capacity for unconditional love. We had to hire a lawyer. We had to prepare for court. We had to spend thousands of dollars defending our right to privacy, our right to draw boundaries, our right to say no to people who had hurt us. And I had to sit in my lawyer's office and go through the entire history. Every detail. Every moment that my parents had rejected me. Every phone call they hadn't made. Every birthday they hadn't acknowledged. Every moment they had chosen reputation over relationship. My lawyer was a woman named Patricia Chun, and she was brilliant. She looked through all of Eleanor's legal documents. She looked at the guardianship arrangements. She looked at the will that explicitly excluded my parents from any access to Christopher. And she smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that only comes when you've found something that changes everything. They have no legal standing, Patricia said. Eleanor made sure of that. She anticipated this. She protected you. The court date arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was exactly 21 years after Christopher was born. I didn't know this at the time, but looking back, the symmetry seems almost deliberate. 21 years of silence. 21 years of them pretending I didn't exist. And now, on the anniversary of his birth, they would finally face me in court. I wore a black dress. I sat in the front row. My parents sat on the other side of the courtroom with their lawyer. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. My father looked tired. And I felt almost nothing. That was surprising, honestly. I had expected anger. I had expected vindication. I had expected some overwhelming flood of emotion. But instead, I felt empty. I felt sad for them. I felt sad for what they had lost by choosing reputation over love. I felt sad for the grandmother who would never know her grandson, and it wasn't because of me. It was because of them. Their own choices. Their own decisions. Judge Amanda Morrison listened to both sides. My parents' lawyer argued that grandparent rights were important, that biological connection mattered, that Christopher might benefit from knowing his extended family. Our lawyer argued something much simpler, that Christopher was an adult, that Eleanor's legal documents made it clear he was protected, that no court in America could force an adult to spend time with people he didn't want to see. The judge didn't take long to decide. She ruled that the petition had no merit. She explained calmly and carefully that Christopher was a legal adult, fully capable of making his own decisions about his relationships. She explained that the guardianship documents Eleanor had created were valid and binding. She explained that while grandparent rights existed in some circumstances, those circumstances did not apply here. And then she said something else. She said, "I note for the record that the petitioners have not demonstrated any prior relationship with Mr. Cole, nor have they shown evidence of meaningful contact over 2 decades. In fact, the evidence suggests the opposite. Under these circumstances, and given Mr. Cole's status as an adult capable of making his own decisions, this petition is denied." My parents didn't cry. They didn't react at all. They just sat there, stunned, as if they couldn't quite believe that money and lawyers couldn't buy them what they wanted. As if they couldn't quite accept that there were some things you couldn't negotiate your way out of, and some relationships you couldn't repair by simply deciding you wanted them back. We left the courtroom, and Christopher put his arm around me, and I finally cried. Not because I had won, though I had, but because I was finally free. I was finally free from the fear that they could take something from me. I was finally free from the worry that they would somehow destroy what I had built. I was finally free from the belief that their judgment of me mattered. They had tried to erase me when I was 15, and I had survived. More than survived, I had thrived. I had raised a good man. I had built a good life. I had surrounded myself with people who loved me without conditions. And when my parents finally tried to claim a piece of what I had built, they learned that they had no power. Not in court, not in Christopher's heart, not in my life. Eleanor passed away 2 years after the lawsuit ended. She left Christopher her house, along with a letter that explained everything. She told him the story of how she had met us, how she had watched me fight, how she had known from the beginning that I was going to be extraordinary. She told him that she had loved us not because she had to, but because she had chosen to. She told him that real family is built on choice, not biology. She told him that he should never accept less than unconditional love from anyone who claimed to be family. At her funeral, my parents didn't show up. They sent a flower arrangement with a card that said, "With sympathy," as if Eleanor had been a distant acquaintance. My son held my hand and didn't say anything, and I understood that he had learned the most important lesson I could teach him. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you don't. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find people who do. To everyone watching right now, I want to be clear about something. This isn't a story about revenge. I haven't done anything to hurt my parents. They've done that to themselves. I've simply lived a good life. I've simply been a good mother. I've simply built something real, with people who chose to be part of it. And when they finally came looking for me, looking for what I had built, they found that it was closed to them. Not locked away with anger or bitterness, but protected by something stronger. The bonds of real love, real choice, and real commitment. My mother once said that I wouldn't amount to anything. She said that without her guidance, without the Cole name and the Cole reputation, I would fail. She said that a 15-year-old pregnant girl with nothing to her name would never build a real life. She was wrong. I built a real life. I built a life full of choice and honest love. I built a life where people stayed because they wanted to, not because they were obligated to. I built a life that was strong enough to survive a lawsuit from my own blood relatives. I built the life that I'm proud of. And my son, the one they said should never have been born, he's a doctor. He's a healer. He saves lives. He has the capacity to love people unconditionally because that's what he learned from watching me. That's what he learned from Eleanor. That's what he learned from the people who chose us, even when they had every reason not to. So, if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness to a story that was supposed to stay silent. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply living well. It's simply being happy. It's simply proving everyone wrong, whoever said you wouldn't make it. Subscribe to Olive Revenge Stories if you want to hear more tales like this one. Comment below and tell me your story. Tell me about the people who chose you when blood relatives wouldn't. Tell me about the families you've built outside of biology. Tell me about the moments when you finally felt free. Because these stories matter. They matter because they show us that we're not alone. They matter because they give us permission to build our own families, to draw our own boundaries, and to love fiercely the people who choose us back. My parents taught me what conditional love looks like. Eleanor taught me what unconditional love means. And my son taught me that the legacy that matters isn't about a name or a reputation. It's about the people you raise to be kind. It's about the difference you make in the world. It's about love without conditions, without limits, without end. Thank you for letting me tell this story. Thank you for caring enough to listen. And thank you for believing that stories like mine deserve to be heard.